Hello and welcome from Lansing to the Lakeshore. It's good to have you with us again. And today we have Noah Hall with us. Noah is an attorney, also been involved in working in the nonprofit sector, mainly for National Wildlife Federation, and has worked with me on several issues dealing with the Great Lakes. But we want to talk about invasive species today, one of my favorite topics, and one which is of utmost importance to anybody who actually either lives or uses our Great Lakes or our inland lake water, because now not only do we have invasives in the Great Lakes, but I'm getting every year many more calls of concern and complaint about invasive species in our small inland lakes. A real problem and a challenge for us. So we'll talk a little bit about the law that I wrote a few years ago and its effect, and some of the new things that are happening on invasives. So I'm going to turn to Noah first and ask him for a brief introduction to tell you a little bit about what he does and his background, and then we'll get into invasive species. Welcome, Noah. Good to have you with me again today.
Thank you, Senator. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a law professor at Wayne State University Law School in Detroit. I also teach at University of Michigan Law School and have done quite a bit of work in water law, environmental law, and Great Lakes protection in general. So invasive species has obviously been a major part of my work, and I know a major part of your efforts for the past few years.
Good. Well, tell us, first of all, what's happened. Well, maybe we ought to start with what an invasive species is. I think that's probably the best way to begin.
Sure. Pick your least favorite invasive species. Let's start with the zebra mussel.
Zebra mussels.
Zebra mussels seem to be the most universally despised species for anybody who owns a boat, has a dock, anybody who runs any type of facility on a lake. These are horribly invasive critters, came into the Great Lakes, have bred out of control. And like most invasive species, the problem is this. An invasive species, when it's in its home territory, is fairly harmless because in its natural ecosystem, there are predators and other natural checks to ensure that that species doesn't get out of control. What happens is that they're brought to a new ecosystem, a new environment, and we can discuss how that happens in a few moments, and essentially they find the doors wide open. So a species like the zebra mussel shows up in the Great Lakes. There's no predators, there's no other species competing for the same type of food, and their population explodes out of control. They cause tremendous environmental damage, tremendous economic damage, and now the stakes are going even higher up. We're beginning to see invasive diseases entering the Great Lakes, various viruses and bacterial strains that come in that the fish in our Great Lakes have no immunity to. And so they can really devastate our fish populations and our fisheries in the Great Lakes.
And the invasives are almost pervasive, because they can spread so quickly, and we have not found, at least to my knowledge, any way to get rid of any of the invasives that we have.
Yeah, it's one of the major...
We've been able to contain them in some spots, but we've not been able to get rid of them. But let's go back to the zebra mussels first. Describe a zebra mussel quickly so people, first of all, if they haven't seen one, they'll know what one looks like, and they'll know they aren't those cute little shells that some people, when we first started seeing them on Lake Michigan beaches in West Michigan, when we were doing the annual beach sweep that we did every year in Saugatuck Dunes State Park, the first year we found them, I had volunteers come back, and they were just like the tip of the finger, a small finger, not even as big as your thumb. And they came back and they said, "Look at these cute little seashells we found."
Right.
So describe them a little bit. And then
I guess an individual zebra mussel I would describe as a cute little, a cute little bivalve. Yeah, it's size of maybe your pinky fingernail.
Right.
The problem is obviously we don't just have one or two of them scattered about. You have millions of them. They pile up on beach shores. They cover rocks and boats. I can't tell you how many people I know who've cut their feet walking on beaches and rocks covered in these things. They clog intake valves. We spend billions, that's with a B,
Billions.
billions of dollars a year, not to eradicate the zebra mussel, because we have no way to eradicate it, not to get rid of it or solve the problem, just really to deal with the problem, to clean our intake valves, to clean our docks and our shipping structures. It's a tremendously expensive and costly problem to deal with, and a terrible nuisance to anybody who uses or owns property on the Great Lakes.
You know, Noah, I think you've heard me say this before, but when I started doing research on invasives and in combination with the legislation I was doing, it was amazing to me how much we all, even though we don't know it, spend on dealing with invasives. For instance, the intake pipes on the water intake and for not only our municipal water supplies, but for our electric power companies and our nuclear power companies that pull in water to do the processing. They have huge intake pipes out in the lakes, and they are literally getting clogged up with these zebra mussels. And some of the folks from some of these communities have told me they now have to send down divers not once, not twice, but sometimes 3 to 4 times a year just to clean out the invasives, so that they will be able to continue to supply power and or supply water to the communities. And we're all paying for it in our electric bills, in our heating bills, in our water bills. We don't know it. It's just quote unquote a cost of doing business, but to the point of several $billion a year well, actually nationwide.
Yeah. Well, it's one of these frustrating problems where it's brutally expensive to deal with them once they're here. And as you said, we have no solution usually to get rid of them once they're here. But preventing them from coming in the first place is actually not very costly at all. This is a classic example where an ounce of prevention is worth well more than a pound of cure. Some simple, fairly cost-effective measures would prevent the spread of most invasive species into the Great Lakes and save us millions and billions of dollars of dealing with them once they're here, where we don't even have a solution.
Now, tell us first where they come from.
Well, they come from all over. Oftentimes, many of our invasive species come from shipping ports in the Baltic, in Asia, either coastal areas or freshwater areas that are similar enough to the Great Lakes that a species that could survive there can also survive here. But different enough that we don't have the exact same species.
Right.
So basically, they come to the Great Lakes from a port 4,000 miles away on the Baltic Sea.
And how do they get here?
Well, that's the issue. There are several ways that invasive species come into the Great Lakes, but the single greatest pathway is the ballast water of ships, which is essentially to say that they come by accident. It's not that shippers intend to bring invasive species from the Baltic Sea to the Great Lakes. They have no interest or motivation to transport these species here. They come inadvertently because ships take in ballast water when their cargo holds aren't full in order to maintain a trim ship. And then when they come into the Great Lakes, they discharge their ballast water, which often has, even if it's just 1 or 2 individual species, or now that we're dealing with pathogens like this new fish virus, they could be microscopic. And as long as there's anything in that water, or 2 to breed, we can have a problem on our hands.
So talk to us then a little bit more about some of the other invasives, and then we'll talk about some of our attempts at dealing with them.
Sure. Well, the new fish virus is probably the most concerning invasive species in the Great Lakes. It's in 4 of the Great Lakes. It's not yet in Lake Superior. We're hoping desperately that protections will be put in place before it spreads to Lake Superior. It's a fish virus that we have no cure for. It devastates many of our popular sport fishes, as well as salmon and trout species, and it can really cause the Great Lakes fisheries to collapse. We can lose both our commercial and our sport fishery